happening right now is an outrage. And what Vladimir Putin is doing is such a gross violation of international law, threatening nuclear weapons, which he did in his statement, speaking about denazification. And I'm so appreciative of Anna's statement. As an American Jew, I'm so deeply offended by the idea that he's using that argument against a Jewish leader, elected leader of Ukraine, that it's hard to imagine what would have worked at this moment. So in the Obama administration, the sanctions that were put in place were calibrated to stop him in his tracks, and it did, but it didn't roll him back, obviously. And that's the challenge that we're in, is that we have a leader in Vladimir Putin hell-bent on aggression. And we have borderlined around him with military support to our allies, putting in these sanctions that are happening now and attempting to roll him back through international unity. But again, he is not listening to reason or diplomacy. And I just have to add, this goes back more than 2 decades. Even President Bush said he looked into Vladimir Putin's eyes, looked into his soul, basically. And so for more than 2 decades, American presidents have been trying to reason with him and push back. And now here we are where he's showing his incredible true colors.
So are you saying that he's not someone that you can reason with? And I ask that because we are currently working with Russia in order to get the Iran nuclear deal back in place, which is a weird dichotomy, Joel.
It's a very strange dichotomy. And we've had nuclear agreements with Russia under his leadership, New START, in 2011, which reduced the level of nuclear warheads that we both maintain. And we have a history with the Soviet Union of having diplomacy while also competing. But this is different. And something is very perplexing about this moment, this argument that goes back further and deeper into Russian psyche, according to Vladimir Putin, about reestablishing spheres of influence, this sort of grievance of the loss of the Soviet Union. We've seen grievance politics before in Europe. Hitler had a grievance when Germany lost World War I, and he carried that with him into World War II. And so this is different. So, yes, we've been negotiating and engaging at multiple levels, and we have worked through those agreements, and they've been verifiable. But he has not taken it diplomatically into the level of questions of war and peace in any meaningful direction, certainly over the last recent years.
Joel, hang on. I want to ask you about sanctions, but to the general, there's this gap between. I'm sorry, the colonel. My apologies. There's this gap between the shelling that we saw this morning across Ukraine in multiple different cities, and now there's quiet. Why that flurry of action about 3 hours ago now, 4 hours ago now, and nothing?
Well, it's hard to say, but I expect that this air campaign is going to continue. My assumption is that it's a combination of missile attacks and airstrikes. Typically, these will go on for several days. We have a precedent in the U.S. Air campaigns against Iraq in 1991 and 2003. In those air campaigns, the strikes went on for a considerable amount of time. They started with air defense and air forces. And also command and control. And I think that's what you're seeing in Ukraine. That is attacks on air bases and some of the air defenses, very likely. And some of the attacks in Kiev may well be against headquarters. A little hard to say, but these could go on for quite a while. And very often there's a respite while the Russians, in this case, do some reconnaissance and figure out, what effect their strikes had as they get ready for the next round of strikes.
The other question I have, and I'd like to pose it to you, is from what we've seen in the buildup of Russian forces around Ukraine, would they be able to hold portions of Ukraine, cities in Ukraine like Kyiv, for any length of time with the assets they currently have in place?
Well, that's a great question, because the Russians have built a considerable force, but Ukraine is a very large country. Back in early 1943, when the Germans and Soviets faced off across essentially this front line, the Soviets had well over 1 million men. So it's not clear to me that they have the capability to take over the entire country or even the entire eastern region particularly if there's a strong Ukrainian resistance. I think they're going to have to focus their efforts in a couple of places.
Joel, I do want to ask you again about sanctions. Do you believe that the sanctions that the president is going to announce today, should they be the whole fleet of the sanctions, or should he be holding some back?
Yeah, this is the moment, Katie, for the whole fleet. This is the moment where the heavy punishing sanctions that have been prepared along with our allies, and the crucial dynamic here is making sure that the allies are on board with this, but that these sanctions go forward aggressively and that we move into the dynamic of export controls following on really watching cutting out Russia from the global financial system in a meaningful, impactful way, hurting the oligarchs around Vladimir Putin, and making sure the Russian people understand that they are being punished for Vladimir Putin's actions.
Joel Rubin and Colonel Mark Hansian, thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate it.